Guys, who were the worst people you ever met? The narcissistic ex. I once dated a guy who seemed perfect at first, but after a few months, I realized he only cared about himself. It started off with little things. He would interrupt me in conversations, make everything about his feelings, and hardly ever ask about mine. But things escalated quickly. He would belittle me in front of friends, always making jokes at my expense, and when I tried to talk about it, he would make me feel like I was overreacting. The real wake-up call came when I found out he'd been texting another woman behind my back. It was a slap in the face to realize I wasn't just a side thought to him. I was a tool for his ego. I left him after that, but it took a long time to rebuild my confidence and self-worth. The manipulative boss. I had a boss who was one of the most manipulative people I've ever met. He was a master at making you feel like you were doing something wrong, even when you were going above and beyond. If something went well, he'd take all the credit, but if anything went wrong, he'd find someone else to blame. One time, I stayed late to meet a deadline, only for him to accuse me of not doing enough and berate me in front of the entire team. He was always watching, controlling, and pretending to be this supportive figure, but deep down, he was the kind of person who would stab you in the back without hesitation. It wasn't until I got another job offer that I finally found the courage to walk away. The two-faced friend. I had this friend who always acted like the perfect companion when we were alone, but the minute we were in a group, she would turn on me. It started small, little snide remarks, or not defending me when others were being rude. But one night, after I confided in her about something very personal, I overheard her telling another friend all the details of my story, twisting it and making me sound crazy. When I confronted her, she acted like I was being overly sensitive and just shrugged it off. I realized then that I wasn't just a friend to her. I was someone she could use for entertainment and drama. I cut her off completely, and although it was painful, it was the healthiest decision. The abusive father. My father was the type of man who believed that because he worked hard and provided for us, he had the right to treat everyone with contempt. He would insult me and my siblings constantly, calling us lazy, worthless, and good for nothing. We were never allowed to have an opinion or do anything for ourselves. The worst part was that he didn't just physically hurt us sometimes. He'd make us feel emotionally and mentally small. I didn't realize the full extent of his toxicity until I was an adult. It took years of therapy to unlearn the emotional abuse I experienced. Even now, when I hear someone speak with that same tone, it sends a chill down my spine. The liar ex-husband. I married a man who, at first, seemed like the one. But as time went on, I began to notice that he had a habit of lying about the smallest, most insignificant things. Things that didn't even matter. At first, I chalked it up to him being forgetful or misinformed, but soon it became clear. He was a compulsive liar. He lied about where he was, what he was doing, and even about things like how much money we had in our account. After a while, I couldn't trust him with anything, and the lies became so absurd that it felt like I was living in a fantasy. When I confronted him, he would deny everything and turn the blame on me. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I filed for divorce. But the emotional scars from those years stayed with me for a long time. The jealous coworker. There was this woman at my job who was so threatened by me that she started sabotaging my work. She would undermine my efforts in meetings, spread rumors about me to our boss, and make it seem like I wasn't a team player. She would always try to one-up me, even when it came to the smallest of tasks. She was threatened by my success and couldn't stand to see me excel. At first, I thought it was just competition, but when I found out she had been stealing my ideas and presenting them as her own, I realized how deep her jealousy went. I decided to confront her, but she just laughed it off and made it seem like I was the one with the issue. I learned that some people are just toxic and thrive on bringing others down. The gaslighting friend. One of my closest friends used to gaslight me constantly. No matter what I did, she would twist things around and make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. If I pointed out something she did that upset me, she'd deny it and accuse me of being too sensitive. If I had an emotional reaction, she'd dismiss it as me being dramatic. It got to the point where I started doubting my own feelings and questioning my reality. When I finally distanced myself from her, It was like a weight lifted. I realized how toxic that friendship had become and how much damage gaslighting can do to your mental health. The untrustworthy roommate. I had a roommate who was one of the most unreliable people I've ever lived with. She would constantly promise to pay her part of the rent or help with the chores, but then it would never happen. I would remind her, and she'd make excuses or promise she'd do it next time. When I found out she was borrowing my clothes without asking and not returning them, I confronted her. Her response was to act like I was being controlling and paranoid. I felt like I was the only one taking care of everything, and it wasn't long before I realized that she didn't care about our living situation at all. I moved out as soon as I could, but it took me a long time to trust people again. The exploitative relative. There was a relative in my family who only ever reached out when they needed something. Whether it was money, favors, or emotional support, they'd act like they cared, but as soon as they got what they wanted, they'd vanish. It didn't matter how much I gave, it was never enough. And when I stopped helping them, they would turn the situation around, making me feel guilty for not being there for them. Over time, I began to realize that I was just a resource to them, not a family member. I had to set boundaries and cut them out of my life. And while it was tough, I learned that true family doesn't treat you like convenience. The self-centered best friend. I had a best friend who would only ever talk about her own problems. No matter what I was going through, she would always find a way to turn the conversation back to herself. If I had an issue, she'd tell me how her problem was worse. If I had a success, she'd act like it was no big deal. It felt like she didn't care about me at all, and after a while, I started feeling like I was just a listener in her life. When I tried to talk to her about how I was feeling, she accused me of being selfish. I realized I wasn't getting anything out of the friendship and walked away from it. Sometimes people only stay in your life to take, not to give. The unfaithful partner. I was married to someone I thought was the love of my life. But as time passed, I started noticing little things, secretive texts, unexplained absences, and a coldness between us. Eventually, I discovered the truth. He had been cheating on me for months. The worst part wasn't just the infidelity. It was the fact that he looked me in the eyes every day and lied. When I confronted him, he showed no remorse. He blamed everything on me and made me feel like I was the problem. That was when I realized the person I loved didn't even exist. I left him and started rebuilding my life. But the betrayal still stings to this day. The hateful neighbor. I had a neighbor who seemed to have an issue with everything I did. If I played music too loud, she'd complain. If I parked my car too close to her driveway, she'd leave nasty notes on my windshield. No matter how many times I tried to be polite, it never worked. She seemed to take pleasure in making my life harder. The worst part was when she started spreading rumors about me to other neighbors, claiming that I was a troublemaker. I was constantly on edge, wondering what she'd do next. Eventually, I moved, and the relief was palpable. Not everyone you meet has your best interests at heart, and some people just want to cause trouble. The heartless boss. My boss was someone who never showed an ounce of compassion for his employees. If anyone faced a personal issue, whether it was a sick family member or a mental health struggle, he would mock them and make them feel guilty for taking time off. His only concern was his bottom line. When I had to take a sick day because I wasn't feeling well, he accused me of faking it and started criticizing my work. I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to meet his impossible expectations. Eventually, I found a new job, but that toxic environment left me emotionally drained for a long time. The overly critical parent. My mom was the kind of parent who never seemed satisfied with anything I did. No matter how hard I worked, I was never good enough. I would get straight A's, and she would find a way to make it seem like I was capable of more. I could spend hours on a project, only for her to criticize the smallest detail. As I got older, I realized that this wasn't just about me. It was about her insecurities. She would always compare me to other kids, and when I started to stand up for myself, she would say I was ungrateful. It took years for me to distance myself from her criticism, but it felt like the right thing to do. Now, I've learned to appreciate myself, despite her constant disapproval. The selfish ex-wife. I was married to a woman who seemed kind and considerate at first, but once we were married, I started to see her true colors. She expected me to be the one to do all the emotional labor, taking care of the house, our kids, and even her family problems. She didn't have a job and would spend money freely without consulting me, leaving me to foot the bills. But when I tried to talk to her about our finances, she would turn it around, making me feel like I was the problem for being too controlling. After years of feeling neglected and unsupported, I decided to leave her. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life, but I realized that I deserved better than to constantly give without receiving anything in return. The two-timing friend. I had a friend who seemed like the ideal person to confide in. We spent hours together, talked about everything, and I trusted her with my deepest secrets. However, one day, I found out she had been telling other people all of my personal stories, twisting them to make me seem like a completely different person. She did it to make herself look like the good friend and gain attention from others. When I confronted her, she acted like she didn't know what I was talking about. Her lack of remorse showed me that our friendship was based on lies and manipulation. I haven't spoken to her since. The cold, distant sibling. I have a brother who, for the longest time, I thought was just going through a phase. He was always distant, never showed much interest in family events, and rarely reached out. But over the years, I noticed he was subtly putting me down in front of others, making snide remarks about my choices in life. It wasn't until I overheard him talking badly about me to a friend that I realized he had no respect for me whatsoever. I tried to confront him, but he acted like I was overreacting and refused to take responsibility for his actions. Eventually, I stopped trying to fix things, and it became clear that no matter what, our relationship was doomed. The arrogant coworker. At my old job, I worked with a guy who was unbearably arrogant. He would constantly remind everyone how much smarter he was and how much better he was at his job than anyone else. Even when he made a mistake, he would blame it on someone else and try to downplay it. One day, I caught him taking credit for a project that I had worked on for months. When I called him out on it, he acted like I was the one who had no clue what I was talking about. His inflated sense of self-worth was toxic, and I knew I couldn't work with someone like him. I ended up leaving the company shortly after. The hidden alcoholic. I once dated a man who, on the surface, seemed like the perfect catch. He was charming, funny, and easygoing until he started drinking heavily. At first, it was just an occasional drink here and there, but soon it turned into a daily ritual. He would drink until he passed out and then act like nothing happened the next day. He became a different person when he was drunk, angry, bitter, and emotionally detached. What hurt the most was that he would always promise me that he would stop, but the cycle never ended. It wasn't until I found myself constantly walking on eggshells, afraid of setting him off, that I realized I couldn't be with him anymore. I left him, and though it was a difficult decision, I knew it was the right one for my own well-being. The hypocritical religious leader. I once worked for a religious leader who was a well-known figure in our community. He preached about love, kindness, and forgiveness, but his actions were anything but that. He would shame people for their mistakes, talk down to them, and use his position of power to manipulate others. Behind closed doors, he was rude and condescending to everyone around him, including his family. I became disillusioned when I witnessed him belittling one of his congregation members who had come to him for help. It was as if he thought he was above everyone else, and the hypocrisy was unbearable. I left the church, and I've never looked back. The envious neighbor. There was this neighbor who, for some reason, couldn't stand to see anyone else happy. Every time I bought something new for the house or had a party, she would find a way to make a passive-aggressive comment. She would gossip behind my back, telling other neighbors that I was wasteful or irresponsible, all because she was jealous of my life. One day, I caught her spying on me through my window, and that was the last straw. I called her out on it, and she pretended like nothing was wrong, but I knew she was only interested in making my life miserable. I moved away shortly after, and life has been much more peaceful since. The unmotivated partner. I was in a long-term relationship with someone who was constantly telling me about their big dreams and plans for the future, but never actually did anything to work towards them. They had every excuse in the book. No time, no money, too tired, but after years of waiting for them to take action, I realized that they didn't want to succeed. They were perfectly content to live in a state of complacency, and it made me feel like I was doing all the heavy lifting in the relationship. I started to resent them for not contributing to our future, and the relationship became a drain on my energy. Eventually, I ended things because I knew I couldn't keep building a life with someone who wasn't willing to put in the effort. The thoughtless friend. I had a friend who always seemed to forget about me when things were going well for her. Whenever she got a promotion, a new boyfriend, or something exciting happened in her life, she'd go radio silent. But when things weren't going so well, she would turn to me for support, expecting me to drop everything to help her. At first, I didn't mind, but after a while, I realized she only cared about me when it was convenient for her. I tried to talk to her about how I felt, but she dismissed me and accused me of being selfish. I slowly stopped answering her calls, and eventually, I let the friendship fade away. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please, let me know in the comments your own experiences and subscribe for more.